Composed, a novella by J.E. Novotny. Part 6. Camilla tried to steady her breathing as the borrowed carriage rolled toward the imperial palace. Nathan grabbed her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. She tried to return his warm smile, but the butterflies in her stomach were too distracting. She had performed for the Emperor and Empress multiple times over the years, but always at the theater. She had performed for many noble ladies over tea, but never the highest lady in the land. And then, of course, there was her new title to consider. That changed things, surely, and yet she wasn't quite sure how. The palace towered over its environs, which comprised 4 distinct gardens, each of various styles, yet harmonious from a distance. The view was lovely, but Camilla found it difficult to enjoy it at present. Perhaps on her way out she would be able to admire it more. The carriage rolled to a halt, and the footman opened the door. Nathan stepped out first, and then he turned back to assist Camilla out of the carriage. She wore one of the costumes from the theater. It wasn't one of her own dramatic ensembles, but a somewhat simpler green dress with silver embroidery that Mira had procured from somewhere in the basement. The seamstress had modified the dress to give it a more modern cut. Camilla hoped it would be appropriate. Nathan assured her that she was beautiful in the outfit, so that was a small comfort at least. A butler awaited them outside the palace entrance. He escorted them through a series of hallways to a set of ornate double doors. Camilla was too bewildered to take much note of her surroundings beyond a sense of elegant luxury, and a large amount of white and gold. Another man at the doors took their names from Nathan. The man swung the doors open and announced, "Lady Camilla and her guardian, Mr. Nathan Fleetman." Ladies in voluminous skirts were arranged on divans and sofas, with 1 or 2 leaning artfully against a windowsill. There were men in brightly colored jackets and pointed hats spread throughout the sea of skirts. Half the company wore masks or carried them in their hands. It was the fashionable thing among the nobility to wear masks that covered either the top half or the whole face. Those who followed the trend often made themselves recognizable in other ways, such as vibrant hairstyles or signature jewelry depicting a family crest. The masks made Camilla think of her composer, and she smiled, slightly more at ease, as a hint of excitement wormed its way into her mind. Perhaps her composer was a lord, and she would find him here. It would be just like a fairy tale. Nathan squeezed her hand and led her to join the milieu. The Empress and Emperor had not yet entered. Nathan settled Camilla onto a free sofa. He set her violin case beside her on the floor before taking up a spot standing just behind the sofa. He placed his hand on the backrest near her shoulder, not quite touching, but signaling quite clearly that he intended to remain with her. This was a comfort, as Nathan was far better at talking to people than Camilla was. The ladies and gentlemen around them chattered animatedly, while sending less than sneaky glances at the 2 newcomers. Luckily, the scrutiny was shortly interrupted by the entrance of the Emperor and Empress. They were regal as they entered arm in arm. The Empress wore a magenta dress with a skirt that fanned out behind her on the floor. The Emperor wore more somber gray, but even from a distance the quality of the fabric and tailoring was apparent. Camilla shifted uncomfortably as she stood with the others to make her curtsies to the ruling pair. Everyone remained standing until the Empress was seated on a sofa not far from Camilla. The Emperor moved away almost immediately to speak in low tones with a man whose jawline reminded her of someone. Camilla shook her head. She was daydreaming about the composer again. She doubted there was an actual likeness between the composer and the stranger the Emperor was talking to. She turned her attention to the Empress, who was listening to a woman that Camilla did recognize. It was the lady who had helped her escape from an interminable tea one afternoon. Camilla was delighted to find the woman there. "Oh, Marta, you always have something wicked to say, but I don't believe you mean a word of it," Empress Amelia said, drawing the attention of many. She immediately turned away from Marta and spoke to Camilla. "My dear, I do apologize that a formal induction into your new title was not given. However, I assure you that we recognize your new status and appreciate your contributions to the arts in our land." The Empress stopped and slapped her hands together rapidly in a spasm of excitement. "A ball! There must be a ball to celebrate the creation of a new house." The Emperor broke off his conversation and joined the women. "An excellent idea, my dear," he said, taking her hand and kissing the back of it. He took up a spot behind the Empress with his hand on her shoulder as he addressed Camilla. "As my wife says, we were not thinking quite clearly due to your beautiful music and spoke your title without thought. But do not doubt that the title is earned and given with full intent." Camilla wished that she were still standing so she could curtsy or bow deeply, but from her seated position she could only bow her head. "Perhaps your Majesties would like to hear a song. I received this sheet music a few days ago." "From the same composer?" the Empress asked, enthusiasm shining in her eyes. "Yes, your Majesty." "And you've no idea who it could be?" the Emperor asked. "No, your Majesty. A very talented composer, certainly, but beyond this I do not know anything." Conversation continued from there to music in general, the most popular composers and players of previous years, the best spectacles and concerts, the best operas. "It's been a few years since we've had a truly great opera," Marta commented. There was a muted murmur of assent, but no one picked up the topic, and the Empress chose that moment to ask if Camilla would grace them with the new song. "But of course, your Majesty," Nathan answered for her. He lifted Camilla's violin case from the floor for her as she stood. As with all teas that Camilla had attended before, one song followed another for half an hour before the request for more ceased. The Empress handed her a fresh cup of tea as she resumed her seat. "Beautiful, Lady Camilla. Our thanks," the Emperor said. He drifted away soon afterward to rejoin the men of politics on the far side of the room. The women, now left to their own devices, began discussing the ball to be held in the newly titled Lady Camilla's honor. Nathan drifted toward the men as well, and Camilla gave him an encouraging smile. The familiar act of playing the violin for a group of nobles had settled her nerves, so she felt she had a bit of confidence to offer him. It was only a short time later that the Empress expressed her need to dress for dinner, a clear dismissal to all. As Camilla prepared to leave, she stopped short at the sound of a voice that teased at her memory. The man spoke again, and she turned, expecting, for a moment, to see her composer standing there, with his charming smile and impeccable clothing. But she knew instantly that it wasn't him after all. There was a similarity in the line of his jaw and the shade of his hair, but it wasn't him. When he spoke again, this time to her, she knew without a doubt it wasn't the same man. "I congratulate you, Lady Camilla. You've had a fine debut." He took her hand and bowed over it before moving away. Lady Marta came up to her next and extended an invitation to dine with her the following evening. "Just a small, intimate affair," she said. She lowered her voice and added, "And my dear, for once, don't bring your violin. As much as I adore your playing, you deserve a night off. You are to be my guest, not my entertainment. I leave it up to you whether or not you bring your guardian." The hesitation before the final word was small but pronounced. Camilla wondered what it meant, and she hoped she would have occasion to find out at this dinner, where, she decided, she most certainly would not bring Nathan.